Hey everyone, it's Rove. I don't normally make a video to reply to a comment. I'd normally write back. Um, but this one, there's a lot to unpack. If I wrote back, I'd exceed the character count. Uh, so, uh, this is directed to Sally08. But I think it could be a good lesson in history and culture. First, I'll admit when I read this comment back on November 5th, yes, I shook my head and I ignored it. If you want to express your opinions, fine. I don't like censorship. I can simply ignore you, give you your little space. But then you copied and pasted it again in my most newest chapter on November 8th. Getting two near identical messages could count as spamming, but it was only twice. You're trying to get my attention. You have it. Also, I don't think you know this, but I get emails for every edit made to a comment on my stories. I saw what you originally wrote, and I see every single comment or edit. And you edited a lot. I got spammed with emails as you kept editing and adding more and more. I've actually had people abuse this. Like, they'll write to me directly, they'll call me a piece of shit, and because they'll know I'll get that email. And then they go back and they edit it and they'll put like an emoji. Like nothing happened. So yeah, getting the copy pasted second message, getting bombarded with edited comment emails. You got my attention. It made me look again at the first message. And I realized you crossed a line. And I may be legally obligated to report your comment to AO3. I encourage discourse, even uncomfortable discourse. You want to talk about Israel and Palestine? Let's do it. But I don't tolerate intolerance. It's the intolerance paradox. I don't allow hate speech, and it is not allowed according to AO3. Which is why I said I may be legally obligated to report this. I don't want to get in trouble for your comments being on my story. Just a side note, I've been very lucky. I have rarely gotten hate comments on dangerous territory. I thought it'd be much worse. I was worried just how bad it would be. Hasn't been that bad. Unfortunately, when it comes to Zionism, as you mentioned in your comment, I'll get to that, the line between discourse and hate speech becomes razor thin. I'll explain why your comment crossed the line. So hopefully you can work on this in the future. Let's have a discourse free from hate. Okay? So I will address your first message to me, not the copy-pasted one. It's shorter, and I feel it's more problematic. Okay. You wrote, since you wrote about the Yazidi genocide, well, it happened at the hands of the Daesh, ISIS. Precisely. Daesh also targeted other Muslims, and not Islamic countries in general. Yes, the largest amount of civilian casualties at the hands of the Islamic State, ISIS, ISIL, all that, are other Muslims. So this includes, again, ISIS, ISIL, other Islamic State branches, or is it Daesh or Daesh? Daesh? Let me know. Americans can't even say Oregon right. Ask an American how to say my state, and they'll be like, Oregon or Oregon. Oregon, come on. We can't even pronounce our own states properly. So yeah, we can't pronounce other countries properly or groups. We just don't. Okay, so my second point, cutting out all the filler and getting down to the grammatical root of your sentence. You're saying I wrote that genocides, Yazidi genocide, happened at the hands of Islamic countries in general. That's not what I said. I went back just to make sure. I wrote, the Yazidi people have been heavily persecuted in Islamic countries. This is factual. The attacks happened only within Islamic countries. I also said I should emphasize not all Muslims support this. Millions protest against the xenophobic attacks made by the leaders of some Islamic countries. At its core, Islam is a religion of peace. It is only a few who twist those beliefs into vile atrocities. I also said Yazidi take remembering their history of persecution as a central part of their identity and have an oral history of 74 genocides over the centuries. 2 are in the 21st century alone by ISIL, and they were the worst ones yet. So yes, the Islamic State, ISIL in particular, was responsible for 2 of the genocides. 2 out of 74. So the blame, if you want to blame anyone, is not solely ISIL, because the genocide of the Yazidi has been going on long before they formed. It would be like saying, uh, don't blame Christian countries for the persecution of the Jews. It was only at the hands of the Nazis. No. I could have named and shamed which countries have blood on their hands. I didn't. All I said was it happened in Islamic countries. Next part, you say, allow me to update you a bit so that you can add more in your note list under this fic. Wonderful, let's go. You continue. You should include the genocide and ethnic cleansing against Palestinians that has been happening for 75 years now since the illegal terrorist colonization of Palestine in 1948. First off, this has nothing to do with the Yazidi. You're kind of piggybacking on their tragedy. Don't do that. But okay, I'll hear you out. First, illegal terrorist colonization. No. First, Israel isn't illegal. Under international law, the state of Israel has always been legal. It has always met the standards for recognition as a sovereign state. You can dislike it, but you cannot say the existence of Israel is illegal. That's just a lie. So, let's discuss facts. I like that. Okay? So, not only has Israel been a sovereign state since 1948 and a member of the UN since 1949, in 1993, I was alive. I remember this. I'm old. The Israeli Prime Minister and Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat exchanged letters of mutual recognition. The Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, recognized Israel's right to exist as a sovereign nation. 25 Islamic countries, or whatever term you want me to use, who were also part of the UN back in 1948, voted against Israel being accepted. You're allowed to vote against it, but everyone else voted for it. So Israel was allowed to join the UN as a sovereign nation. They are legally a sovereign nation. Okay? Just clearing that falsehood out. Okay. So while the 25 nations back in 1948 did vote against it, the Palestinians, the leadership at least, recognized Israel as legal. The Palestinians themselves recognize Israel. All except for a few extremist factions who resort to terrorist attacks. The rest are fine. Why aren't you? starting in 2006 with the rise of Hamas, talks of Israel being illegal or delegitimization began to rise online. People think Israel needs to live up to higher standards if they are to be treated as equals in the global community. The problem is, should any country have to match these standards, very few nations would be legal, including mine. They commit ethnic cleansing, says Afghanistan, who killed or drove out literally every single Jew from their country. Or Egypt, once home to one of the most ancient Jewish communities, continuous Jewish communities. There's now like 30, probably less. They're all old. Or Saudi Arabia, Libya, Iraq, Yemen. I could list, and I have in my story, how many, whatever term you want to use, Middle East, Muslim countries, Islamic countries, Middle East, I don't know. How many of them have committed genocide against the Jews? And then they turn around and say Israel shouldn't exist because they are doing ethnic cleansing. Wow, okay, let's delegitimize everyone who does, including probably your country. I don't think I'm just going to pick on Arab nations. Should the United States be considered legal after what we did to the Native Americans? Or what about Australia? The Aborigines? Ask Canada about how they treated the First Nations. Or pretty much every country in Europe, especially when it comes to Africa. Very few countries could meet the standards that those anti-Israel countries want Israel to attain. Ask yourself, what makes them unique? What makes Israel so damn special that they are held to a completely different standard than anyone else in the world? What is unique about Israel? I think we both know. Holding a Jewish state to a higher standard than any Christian, Islamic, Buddhist, Hindu, Shinto, any other religiously dominated country, that's anti-Semitism in itself. Otherwise, you'd treat them equally. So claiming Israel is illegal because you're holding them to a different standard than any other country in the world is just hate. Well, that's point one. Next you call them terrorist. I can see why you feel that way. If we're talking about the start of the State of Israel, 1948, yeah, there were a lot of revolutionist Zionists back then. They resorted to guerrilla warfare. And this happened long before World War II even started, and continued long after. However, they were up against nations who literally threatened to wipe Jews off the face of the planet. Israel was getting flooded with immigrant Jews from Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Syria, Transjordan, Lebanon, all with stories of atrocities, while also hearing stories from Holocaust survivors. So yeah, these revolutionist Zionists truly did fear that they were fighting for their survival. Do we call them terrorists? Do we call the French resistance terrorists? If you'll notice, the Germans do in my story. What about Native Americans who made attacks against white settlers because they were constantly getting raided and slaughtered? Are they terrorists? Or were they defenders? So I'll let it stand. Who you call a terrorist just shows which side you're on. But I will say calling all Israelis terrorists due to the action of a small extremist faction is like calling Muslims terrorists because Al-Qaeda exists. Your third point is colonization. Palestine, Israel, used to be a colony under the Ottoman Empire. And then it was a protectorate, British mandate, whatever you want to call it. Back in 1901, there was this German baron who was a Jew. He arrived in the Ottoman province that Europeans called Palestine. He legally purchased a tract of land and basically set up a little commune of agriculturalists. He wanted a communist paradise for Jews to live in peace and harmony with their neighbors, and they called themselves the Jewish Colonization Association. They're still around, but today they're known as the Jewish Charitable Association, and they're still active. They teach farming to children and give tours of the countryside. So was the land colonized? The Zionists who first moved there thought so. But then again, so is Australia. So is North, Central, and South America. Double standards. That was a lot to unpack for one sentence. Okay, moving on. You continue. The illegally founded terrorist USA-funded State of Israel and Israelis included are both doing harm to the Jews and Jewish people and giving them a very bad reputation, and that for me should be important to note. You have no commas, so I can't tell if you're calling the USA terrorists or Israelis. I have a feeling you probably think both. Um, Once again, there is nothing illegal about the founding of Israel. We have rules about this stuff. They followed the rules. You don't like it? That's on you. Don't lie, though. Don't say they're illegal. They're not. You're just lying. You, again, call them terrorists. You really like to sing that around. Don't. Trust an American who saw the hate and racism and violence that arose when society began to use terrorist as an excuse to hate an entire religion. It was disgusting. The labels we slap onto others affect how we treat them. Okay, next you say U.S. funded state. Guess who else is funded by the United States? Literally fucking everyone. We fund 150 countries. And unless you live in like North Korea, we probably fund your country. And do you have any idea how many nations have their GDPs propped up because the United States pumps money into them? We directly fund some, we give free food, we sell weapons and military surplus to our allies. We love to do that. Especially Poland. Holy crap. If Russia ever attacks them, Poland plans to win. They refuse to be Europe's speed bump. We're selling them all sorts of shit. So, do you want to know who has received the most foreign aid from the USA? Who is the most USA funded state? I looked it up. This was in 2019, which is the most recent year for which comprehensive numbers have been released. Okay. The top USA funded country? Afghanistan. Granted, we pulled out and it all went to hell within a few hours. But in 2019, we gave them nearly $5 billion in aid. So who else is USA funded? In order, again, according to the U.S. government agency, reported by World Population Review. So, Afghanistan with 4.9 billion, Israel with 3 billion, Jordan with 1.7 billion, Egypt 1.5 billion, just under a billion are Iraq, Ethiopia, Yemen, Colombia, Nigeria, and Lebanon. Do you consider them to be USA funded? Why emphasize Israel and not nations that receive just as much, if not more? Again, what makes Israel so damn special? Why are they unique? So, blah, 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 funded state of Israel, and Israelis included. This is where you cross the line. When you take your animosity toward the actions of a nation and blame the people as a whole, you're no longer merely anti-political movement. You're anti-whoever those people are. And I think you and I both know who those people are. Moving on. So blah, blah, blah. Israel and Israelis included are both doing harm to Jews and Jewish people and giving them a very bad reputation, and that, for me, should be important to note. I won't argue against that the state of Israel has done shitty things. But wrapping the Israelis as a whole into this claim, that's wrong. I mean, you were mad at me earlier for saying genocides have happened in Islamic countries committed by terrorist groups. I'll admit that part of my notes was edited. A reader pointed out that originally I had phrased the sentence poorly. I appreciate criticism. And so I looked at that paragraph again, and I caught what she saw. She was totally right. How I phrased it, it sounded like I was blaming not just the terrorists in the countries, not just the political leaders, but the citizens as a whole. That is highly problematic. And I quickly edited it. I'm hoping that's the problem here. I'm hoping what you mean by "and Israelis included" is you simply wording it poorly. Despite making a few dozen edits. Maybe you missed that part. I wouldn't want someone to think I'm bigoted against, let's say, the French. All because what I really mean to say is the French government treats the Romani people as second-class citizens. Or I don't think they're citizens. But as second class. They're treating them like shit. I don't like the government and what they're doing. I have no problem with the French. They're cool. So I'm going to try to give you a huge benefit of the doubt. Because saying Israel and Israelis included, that's not just crossing the line. That's playing Red Rover and absolutely barreling your way across the line. And then you end with is giving the Jews a bad reputation. I would counter-argue, it's not giving them a bad reputation. It's reinforcing the prejudices people already have. I'll go back to 9/11. The people who feared, hated, and attacked Muslims in the United States already hated people who were not their same religion, not their same color, who were different. It didn't give Arabs and Muslims a bad reputation. It solidified bigotry. Your next sentence. Also, since you mentioned Islamic countries, then what the Zionist terrorist state of Israel is doing to a whole-ass defenseless population is in the name of a Jewish country, right? First off, Zionist terrorist state of Israel, could you be more bigoted? Try add in a few more adjectives. Oh, wait, you already did earlier when you pointed out USA funds them, like we fund 150 other countries and claiming they're illegitimate. Okay, anyway, once more, I never blamed Islamic countries. You misread. I didn't list which countries were supporting the Islamic State, both ISIS and ISIL. I didn't list which nations directly made attacks against the Yazidi. I didn't want to blame a specific country. I could have. I wrote that the Yazidi genocides were happening in Islamic countries, and such attacks were supported by government leaders. That is factual. If you're angry that I used the words Islamic countries to talk about that region of the world, I'd love to know another term. Please tell me. Because, at least in the United States, there are 3 terms, probably more, honestly, for a generalization of that region of the world. Middle East, which I don't think includes that particular area. I don't know. The Muslim world, I didn't want to use that. Or Islamic countries or Islamic nations. Islamic State. I don't want to use Islamic State because ISIS. I wanted to generalize. So if I want to say the Yazidi genocides happened in this area of the globe, what term would you like me to use? What doesn't trigger you to this level of anger? I'm sorry, tell me. To answer your question, no, what Israel does is not in the name of a Jewish country. That would be anti-Semitic. And I firmly stand against that sort of sentiment. I hope you do too. But I know you don't, because although I really wanted to give you the benefit of the doubt when you said Israel and Israelis included, then there's what you say next. This part made me laugh initially, and then made me very disappointed that someone could get 97 fucking chapters into my story and somehow still have this I don't even know what to say. You wrote, Zionism and what it has done, is doing, and will continue to do is much worse than what the Nazis themselves did on so many levels. So you should include in your note list that Zionism is Nazism. I made a short video when I first read that where I simply replied, "No." As someone who used to teach, who failed you? I'm sorry your teachers failed you. Or your education didn't stick. Or maybe you live in a part of the world where there's really poor funding for education. Part of me hopes you're just some 15-year-old edgelord. But then someone on Facebook pointed out people who are like this can be highly educated. They do their research. They dig as deep as the rabbit hole goes. They could spend years delving deeper and deeper, all to come up with conclusions like Hitler was pushed into the Holocaust by the Jews, or the Gestapo was run by a Jewish cabal of lizard people Illuminati. Worst of all, they are so brainwashed, they're positive they know a truth other people don't. They're special. They worked it all out. According to this friend on Facebook, like, they have a relative, I don't want to say who, I had like whole ass notebooks full of their references, books written about the subject. Oh, it's in a book, it must be real. Look into who the author is. They find it online and then they read it over and over again. Copy and pasted from one to another. Trust me, in doing research about World War II and Nazis, I've absolutely come across this. You see a lie pasted in 2,000 websites that come up in Google search. It must be true. Evidence that proves their theories. And then they find online communities reinforce what they already believe. I was raised in a cult. I know how hard it is to break out. They cherry pick 100 truths to cover up the blatant lie festering under it all. Makes me wonder, how did denazification work? Like, how do we apply it now? We managed to unbrainwash whole countries. It wasn't just the Nazis. It wasn't just Germany. The very mentality that led to the formation of the Nazi Party had to be undone. And Nazis were staunch believers. Many were raised in it. For me, it was science and facts that got me out of all that. And when someone pointed out all the hatred, all the homophobia of a Christian cult, that doesn't seem to work with conspiracy theorists. How do you teach people who scoff at education? How do you show facts to people who reject reality, who don't think the Holocaust even existed. How? What about denazification worked? Sorry, my brain goes off on these tangents all the time. I might edit this all out. Or I'll keep it. So, sorry. So yeah, you're saying, Zionism and what it has done, is doing, and will continue to do is much worse than what the Nazis themselves did on so many levels, so you should include in your note list that Zionism is Nazism. My background is in American and British history, literature, etymology, political science, Native American anthropology, and medieval weaponry. Not in Middle Eastern studies, I'll admit. So when you say what Zionism has done, is doing, and will continue to do, I had to look this up. I know what Zionism is in theory. I had to look this up. I like to research. Okay. So first, I think we need to address what Zionism is, because especially in the past, I don't know, 25 years since the internet really took off, people throw that around, and I don't think they know more than whatever they read on the internet or heard in some off-brand media or even mainstream media from less than reputable opinion hosts. So, to anyone who has heard of the word Zionist or Zionism, but doesn't know what it means, for one, there's a crap ton of history. 10 words or less. Okay. Zionists support Jewish culture, religion, and Jews returning to Israel. 10 words. My history teachers used to have this exercise, describe it in 10 words or less, then write 10 pages on it. I'm not writing 10 pages. I probably could. That would be something I delve into in a future footnote. But when I do those essays at the end of chapters, like, I could take months researching those, and this is a very problematic subject, with especially in the political climate we're in. I'd rather not put a target on my head, but I might tackle this later. I think it would be good. Anyway, I wrote in chapter 99 notes about Hitler's final solution to the Jewish question. Yeah, so Zionism arose as a solution to the Jewish question. If you missed that part, quick summary. Christian nationalism was on the rise across Europe. Jews were getting attacked. From the mid 1800s on, like, people wanted a solution. Christians did, Jews did. The question was, the Jewish question, how can Christians live in a Christian nation when there's Jews in the way? Mass deportation wasn't ideal, but it was better than Hitler's solution, the final solution. We now call that the Holocaust. So, in 1890, Zionism was born. It was purely a political movement. In fact, it was secular. And it clashed with religious Jews. So these were non-practicing Jews coming up with this. Okay, just clarifying. It was outright rejected by Orthodox, conservative, Reformed Jews. Like, they were like, oh, no, no, no. Their rejection was based on scripture. Okay, based on prophecies, the Messiah. It gets really complicated and really easy to offend people. With time, Zionism became almost universal among Jews, to the point where many Jews claim that if you're anti-Zionist, you are anti-Semitic. I don't agree with that statement. I'll get into why. Okay. Zionism is actually made up of 10 different branches, but it's broken down into 3 ideas, or ideals, excuse me. So it's broken into political Zionism, which is probably what you're thinking of. That's setting up a homeland for Jews in Palestine, voluntary immigration, getting away from all the genocidal maniacs in Russia and Europe. Religious Zionism started up later. Political Zionism was like totally secular, you know, it was not religious at all. Religious Zionism were like, okay, forget the politics. What we want is promoting the religion of Judaism, especially in areas where secular Jews vastly outnumber the religiously practicing Jews. This was becoming really popular as Christian cities stopped the ban on Jews living in their city. It used to be Jews had to live outside. Once they were allowed to move inside, they stopped being kosher. They stopped wearing their appropriate garbs. They wanted to blend in. They were assimilating. Religious Zionism was, let's bring back really ceremonial language. Hebrew was for like 1800 years. It was only ceremonial. People forgot to speak, or Yiddish came about, and other diaspora languages, which is actually why Jews don't know what some of the words in the Torah mean, and why Christian Bible translations make shit up. I've talked about that in my notes, I think. So cultural Zionism first formed because they wanted to document the diaspora, the Jews spreading out, being kicked out of Israel. They spread all over the place. Some went to, Spain, and they began speaking a different language. They began having different ceremonies. Others went to Russia. They kind of formed Yiddish, and they began having their own ceremonies. Others went to France. They began having their own beliefs and stuff. They wanted to document all this. What happened to all the scattered Jews? How their culture, their language, and their religious ceremonies changed over the centuries. And after 1945, they wanted to document the Holocaust. Preserve records, photographs, handwritten letters, and recording the oral histories of the survivors. These centers of cultural learning and historical preservation exist. And to be honest, it's where I get much of my information whenever I need to research about the Holocaust or Jewish traditions, to dig deeper than what my husband knows. He's secular, he's not a historian. I don't think you disagree with those last two. At least I hope you're not anti-Zionist when it comes to Jews preserving their religion and culture. If you are, what the hell are you doing in my story? Mostly non-Jews only focus on the political side of Zionism. And I get it, Zionism began as purely political. And for many people, if you're gonna hate something about a culture, it's safe to hate their politics. I hate French politics. The French government has done horrible things to the Romani. Do I hate the French people? No, they're cool. I hate my own government. Half of Congress should probably be arrested. Am I anti-American? No. The most American thing you can do is shit on politicians. So I get it. You see what the Israeli government is doing, and you're told it's all due to Zionists. Therefore, you say you hate Zionism. What you really mean is you hate what the state of Israel is doing. And that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. However, if you hear Jews claim that every Jew is a Zionist, and thus hating Zionism is by default anti-Semitic, it's because there's those two other branches. The religious and cultural sides. Now, I already said I don't agree with that statement. And that's because it's assuming everyone is educated. Well, that sounds rude. I don't care. The average person in this world knows almost nothing about Jewish culture. Even in America, the second largest population of Jews in the world outside of Israel itself. Ask an American, Gentile, to name 3 Jewish holidays. They're probably going to know Hanukkah right away because they'll see stuff in the stores right next to the Christmas stuff. If they're Christian, they'll probably figure out that Passover used to be a Jewish holiday. And that's about it. Although Yom Kippur is vastly more important, and there's Rosh Hashanah and Purim, the average American doesn't know about these. Let alone a citizen in a country where there aren't Jewish communities and kosher delis on every street corner. So, I don't expect the average person to know what Zionism is. They hear the word on the news. They read it online and they repeat it. At least in America, the only time you hear the word Zionism used by someone who isn't Jewish, it's always anti-Jewish. Which is why every time we hear a conversation about Zionist terrorists, we go, oh fuck, here come the neo-Nazis again. Still, I would wager that most people in this world who claim they're anti-Zionist are only against political Zionism. Okay. As I said, there were 10 forms of Zionism. The lesson continues. The majority of that has to do with how the politics come into play. So, you have political Zionism. They're the OG elites, idealists, guys with romantic ideas of leaving the bloodshed behind, setting up a little place for Jews to live away from Christians who keep massacring them. Radical ideas, but no plans. Then you had practical Zionists. They agreed with the Zionist movement, but they knew there needed to be a plan before they began just going to Israel. There was synthetic Zionism, which sort of blended the go-getters from the planners. Then there was revisionist Zionists. They took all the idealism of 19th century political Zionism, none of the practicality, with a heavy dose of if Arabs kill us, we kill them. Screw coexistence. They are only matched by, I've mentioned them once already, revolutionary Zionists. Guerrilla warfare tactics. Attacking civilians. They killed Arab and Western soldiers. They don't care which side you're on. In some cases, they didn't care if you were Jewish. If you stood against them, they'll cut through you. They are the ones giving the rest of Zionism a bad reputation. On the other end of the spectrum are liberal Zionists. Libertarian economics, equal rights regardless of religion, ethnicity, or gender, coexistence, peaceful integration. They're the ones you want in charge. Sadly, that didn't always happen. Then there's Reform Zionism or progressive Zionism. That's definitely what you'll find here in America. They're more of a religious ideology as opposed to political. So they have a lot more in common with like religious and cultural Zionism, but they do believe the state of Israel must exist in order for the Messiah to come. Okay, I have to explain what I mean by that. There are two schools of thought among religious Jews. Some believe that the Messiah will come and then the Jews will return to Israel and rebuild the temple. Others believe Jews will have to return to the homeland first, rebuild the temple, and that's how you get a Messiah. And actually, Christian Zionists, which are extremely popular in America, they also believe this, but with Jesus, because they think the Messiah already came once, they think he'll come again. So they believe we have to support the Jews in Israel and have to help them rebuild the temple so Jesus will come again. um, that's what the prophecy said. It's a major reason why Americans demand we continue to support Israel in every way we can, because they think they're supporting Christ himself. Back to Jews. Reformed Jews believe that the Jewish people must first prove they can be a light unto the nations, a global example of justice, peace, love, all that stuff. And that is achieved by returning to Israel, somehow figuring out peace, and then rebuilding the temple. That temple is seriously wrapped up in a lot of prophecies. Sorry if my attitude offends anyone. Like, from an outsider's perspective, when you start getting into prophecies about messiahs and end times, yeah, sorry. So that's what Zionism is. 1900 years of nonstop genocides, Christians screaming about the Jewish question, Jews wanting to get the hell out before 6 million get massacred. They wanted a homeland, return to ancient Israel, which is off and on called Palestine. Actually, I like to say off and on because the region went through so many names, like Kingdom of Jerusalem back in the Crusades. I actually had an ancestor who was born in the Kingdom of Jerusalem. I think they were French or British, but yeah, they were born in Jerusalem. It was known as Greater Syria, Arabistan, which is kind of cool, Sidon, Damascus, Eilat. Because, like, at that time, political Zionism, like, they wanted to return, but the land was under the Ottoman Empire. So the Ottomans called it Damascus Eilat. I'm so sorry. Or they called it Philistine. As in the Philistines of the Bibles. Samson gets his hair cut and by Delilah loses his strength, gets captured, big party, he screams, "Let me die with the Philistines!" Brings down the temple, crushes 3,000 civilians. Yeah, collateral damage was a perk in the Bible. Would you count him as a terrorist? Good question. Right? So yeah, it was a Philistine, then Palestine, which became Palestine. If you ever wondered where the name came from, it's Philistines. So during the Ottoman time, like, the word Palestine was used, but it was used by Western countries to refer to the land. So this is where the political Zionists wanted to move to Philistine or Damascus Eilat or whatever. The Ottomans allowed it. There were protests from Arabs living in Jerusalem, like the elitists wrote letters to the Ottomans. But the Ottomans were fine with Jewish immigrants coming in. So this led to the first Aliyah. Aliyah, it's a beautiful name. I know someone named Aliyah. It's basically a reverse diaspora. So rather than Jews being all spread out, they were now all coming back together. At this time and up until 1945, Many political Zionists were fine living as a province of the Ottomans, or a colony, or more accurate, a British mandate of Great Britain following World War One. So as I said, Zionists were secular. Religious Jews opposed the movement, saying they were trying to preempt the Messiah. The Holocaust changed everything. Europe was already struggling with the Jewish question. Russia wanted to push them all into Poland or send them to Siberia, and pretty much did. Germany wanted to send them to Madagascar. That ties into Attack on Titan, as I said in chapter 99, down in the notes. The British already had plans to make Palestine a Jewish homeland, but they wanted to do it incrementally, preserving civil rights for everyone as much as the British Empire cared about civil rights for a strip of land they couldn't even colonize. When the world saw what actually happened in concentration camps, yeah, that changed everything. Zionism was no longer about political idealists who had never set foot in a synagogue in their life. It became about religious freedom, cultural preservation, survival. The rabbis who had rejected the idea because of prophecy interpretations began to rethink things. What does the Torah, the Tanakh, and the Talmud actually say? They began to reinterpret this prophecy. And more than that, it was no longer about moving to the Holy Lands for the hell of it. It was desperately needing to collect Jews into a single area where they could heal from the horrors of the Holocaust. 6 million dead. Suddenly it wasn't just a few thousand Jews wanting to move in. It was hundreds of thousands who needed a place to live, and needed it fast. We couldn't house them all. We were housing Jewish survivors with Nazis, with former SS guards. We were that desperate for literally anywhere for them to go that wasn't a fucking death camp. Some Jews remained in the camps for months. We didn't have enough trains to take them back home. We had to figure out where their home was. Some lived in places that were firebombed, villages that were completely demolished, or they were the last Jewish survivor in their entire city. You know, what would they go home to? Some feared going back because it wasn't like Germany lost and suddenly anti-Semitism was magically vanished. They knew they would still be persecuted, and they might still get killed. Or they lived in lands run by the USSR and Stalin. Well, he sure gave Hitler a run for his money on being the worst dictator ever. So the UK was like, well, we did plan to make Palestine a Jewish homeland, so they handed control of British Mandate Palestine over to the UN, 1947. And the UN came up with a plan to split the land into Arab and Jewish states. 1/3 of the population of Palestine at the time were Jewish. So let's make this area for the Jews and let's make this area for the Palestinians. The Zionist leaders agreed. The Arabs did not. Violence broke out. It basically started a civil war. Those British troops still stationed there, stuck in the middle of it all. Arab nations came out, allied nations showed up. Syria and Iraq, at least, only wanted to secure Palestinian land according to the UN. Egypt and Transjordan, let's just say threats like wipe the Jews off the face of the earth were uttered. Allied nations came to prevent Holocaust 2.0. And it was a shit show. What happens next depends on which side you ask, as I found out when I talked about this moment in history with someone who lives in the Middle East, and we found out we got taught totally different things. Like each side cherry picked to make evidence that they had the moral high ground. If you ask someone educated in an Arab nation, it was the Jews who attempted a genocide, Palestinians were slaughtered en masse, and it was like, I want to say 900,000, I think were the numbers, were forced to flee. They fled to Jordan, Syria. Like I said, it was a shit show. If you ask someone educated in Europe, the Americas, parts of East Asia, the Palestinians fled because Arab forces forewarned them to get the hell out. They were planning a mass assault, marching from the border to the coast and killing anyone in their path. What really happened? Probably a bit of both. There were revolutionist Zionists, and like I said, they were not above attacking civilians. And to be fair, total eradication of the Jews was something that at least Egypt and Transjordan did threaten quite openly. So yeah, it's probably a little mix of both. And the result was pretty tragic, with 900,000 Palestinians forced to flee. Well, that's a whole damn history lesson. Anyway, so back to what you wrote. This next sentence, I'm breaking into two parts. It's a long sentence and a lot to unpack. Part 1. Zionism and what it has done, is doing, and will continue to do is much worse than what the Nazis themselves did on so many levels. What it has done, is doing, and will continue to do. What has a political ideology done? Unless a political ideology is uniquely tied to hatred of a specific group, like Nazism. Ideologies on their own are harmless. The United States started civil wars in other countries because we wanted to set up democracy. Is democracy evil? People will demonize socialism by pointing out the USSR were socialists, and so were the Nazis. National Socialism. Those are wildly opposite sides of the political spectrum. On its own, socialism can be beneficial. Let's take communism. Okay? On its own, communism can end hunger and homelessness, bring about a utopia. I mean, look at Star Trek. If you watch Star Trek, I'm a huge Trekkie. So, I'd love to live in that. They're communists. Money doesn't exist. Unless you're a Ferengi. So, what has a political ideology like Zionism done versus what have Zionists done? That we can talk about. So, which Zionists? The religious Zionists? The cultural Zionists? Or are you only focused on the most extreme group? But it's not Zionism. It's extremists. Now for the second half of your sentence. So you should include in your note list that Zionism is Nazism. You know, in 1967, there was this member of the East German Communist Party who was the first to compare Israel to the Nazis. It led to a synagogue and a Jewish community center in Berlin getting bombed. A few years later, followers of this guy hijacked a French plane, let all the non-Jews off safely, but not any of the Jewish passengers. A few years after that, a movie was made about the hijacking. 2 German movie theaters were firebombed as they showed this film. After that, people realized there was this new form of anti-Semitism, comparing Jews to Nazis, comparing Zionism to National Socialism. Saying Jews who were fine purchasing land in Palestine, living as an Ottoman province or British protectorate or whatever, to have a land where they would no longer face continuous genocides. To say that's worse than Nazis? Even taking what the state of Israel has done, and I agree, the state of Israel has committed war crimes, and taking the absolute most violent group of Zionists, the revolutionists, one of only 10 groups, what they have done in 75 years, which is atrocious, still doesn't compare to what the Nazis did in the city of Warsaw alone. I hope you're really hydrated. Because to compare the two is to spit on the graves of 11 million murdered at the hands of the Nazis. It is a disrespect to the dead and a trivialization of Nazism. It is willful ignorance of just how bad the Nazis were. To dare compare Jews to Nazis is the epitome of anti-Semitism. And if you truly do believe that Zionism is Nazism, you're not one of my readers. My readers are educated. Let's see what else you have to say. And before any AVG, average? Is this an acronym? Whatever. Western media consumer come at me with the anti-Semitism rhetoric. I should note that Arabs themselves are Semite, and also a lot of Jews and Jewish people are against the existence of Israel, so are they also anti-Semitic? You know, the earlier part at least had good spelling, more or less. Did you copy and paste all that part from somewhere else and then you wrote this on your own? Because my goodness, that was hard to read. If English is your second language, I apologize. Sorry. It's just, that was hard to read. Okay. First, the easy part. Arabs themselves are Semite. Semite is an obsolete term. We haven't used that term in like ages. The Semites were a grouping of people based on a similar language. They were made up of Hebrews, Canaanites, Phoenicians, Akkadians, Assyrians, Samaritans, a lot. And yes, indeed, Arabs. the language drifted as cultures and religions took shape. So, like, the Hebrew language and writing are based on Phoenician. Phoenician is based on Aramaic. Aramaic is based on Canaanite. Arabic became a language kind of on its own and significantly later, first millennia or so. Etymologists still debate about the entire Semitic language family. I know Arabs claim to be descended from Abraham. I'm talking about language, not where you think he came from. So everyone that falls under this proto-Semitic language group were characterized as Semites. It's based on language, not necessarily ethnicity. Ethnically, they were probably all Canaanite. Etymology is fun! However, the term anti-Semitic has only ever applied to hatred of Jews. Why? I looked this up. The guy who coined the term was clear. It was about Jews. The only Semitic people Europeans regularly interacted with were Jews. Oddly enough, the word anti-Semitic was coined by a German who was proudly anti-Semitic. I should write about him. His name was I just looked this up. Wilhelm Marr. He formed the Antisemitismliga. I'm butchering that. I'm so sorry. The Anti-Semitic League in Germany. Shitty guy. Kind of a precursor to the Nazis. So that is actually where we get the word. The term used before that was anti-Jewish or Judeophobia. I like that one. Since anti-Semitic was the word was more popular in Germany, and the Holocaust, Nazis were proudly anti-Semitic. And so the term grew in power. It has always been about Jews. Plus, to be blunt, before September 11, 2001, and some planes crashed, Western nations didn't hate Arabs. Racists did, but they hate anyone non-white. Hatred of Arabs today, like post 9/11, directly ties into hatred of Muslims, much like anti-Zionism tends to tie into hatred of Jews. Very similar. So, and these people always point out the extremists, the terrorists, and then claim all of Islam is evil, all Muslims are terrorists, all because of this small group who killed thousands. It's blaming an entire concept like religion, nationality, on the action of a few. That's Islamophobia. while hatred of Jews and Jewish culture is called anti-Semitism, but now I really like Judeophobia. You know, Islamophobia, Judeophobia. It works. Should start using that more. Anyway, so bringing up that Arabs are also Semitic means literally nothing. It doesn't change a definition of a word that has been around since the 19th century. Anti-Semitism has always meant anti-Jewish. So yeah, your comment means nothing besides a piss poor attempt at dodging accountability. And letting me talk about etymology, which I love to do. You don't want anti-Semitic rhetoric after regaling me with anti-Zionist rhetoric? Okay, then how about facts? You like facts? Fact! The ADL, the American Defamation League, which is a group in my country that protects against like bigotry, hate speech, stuff like that, has defined what constitutes anti-Semitic language. And you will be happy to know criticism of the state of Israel is not anti-Semitic. Huzzah! Quoting from the ADL, anti-Semitism is a form of prejudice or discrimination directed towards Jews as individuals or as a group, based on age-old stereotypes and myths that target Jews as a people, their religious practices and beliefs, or the Jewish state of Israel. And let me make it clear, they say elsewhere it's fine if you criticize the policies and actions of the state of Israel. I mean, America prides itself on having the liberty to shit on our country, so yeah, that's criticizing the policies and actions, totally fine. Okay? Continuing the quote, anti-Israel activity crosses the line to anti-Semitism when 1. All Jews are held responsible for the actions of Israel. 2. Israel is denied the right to exist as a Jewish state and equal member of the global community. And 3, traditional anti-Semitic symbols, images, or theories are used. You fit 2 of those criteria. Earlier you said, quote, the state of Israel and Israelis included are both doing harm. You're holding all Israelis accountable for the actions of a few. Not some Israelis, not extremists and terrorists living in Israel. No. You said Israelis included. You also repeatedly claim that Israel is illegal and they're terrorists. What did I say before about pointing out extremists and claiming whole nations, whole national groups, ethnicities, religions are terrorists? It's the same here. You deny Israel has the right to exist as a Jewish state and equal member of the global community. You hold them to standards far exceeding what any other country must meet as a nation. You treat them differently than anyone else. You are, by definition, anti-Semitic. No rhetoric. Just facts. Your comments on my story will be reported and deleted. Any future comments that are not factual or purely against the state of Israel, its actions, will be reported and deleted. If you don't like what Israel is doing, go ahead and vent. But I do not tolerate hate speech. And your words legally constitute as hate speech. But first, let me finish with your comments. You see, your next claim really fascinated me. You say that a lot of Jews and Jewish people are against the existence of Israel. This was honestly news to me, especially given that denying the existence of Israel is de facto anti-Semitism. So I had to look it up. It turns out there are a few groups of Haredi Jews, also known as ultra-Orthodox Jews, who feel this way. They are the Satmar. Forgive me, I'm going to butcher this. Satmar Neturei Karta, the Malachem, and the Dushinsky sects. And a few other that are like really small. So yeah, they believe that the existence of the state of Israel is anti-messianic and thus a sin. This is a religious belief. Also, I wouldn't say a lot of Jews, but like it's a few tens of thousands who feel this way. Out of 16 million Jews worldwide. So like, yeah, being really, really generous. Maybe 1% of Jews are against Zionism. Oddly enough, as I was doing this research, I realized that like most of them live in Israel. Like they were there long before the Aliyah, the gathering back together. So yeah, it's rather ironic that the first people to oppose Jews living in the Holy Lands were Jews living in the Holy Lands. I'll also say, like, Haredi in general, but especially these fringe groups, are considered extremist by the rest of the Jewish community. And that's from a Jewish Education Center page. This isn't like an opinion of an American Jew. They are extremists. So you ask, would they be categorized as anti-Semitic? They are not prejudiced against ethnic or religious Jews, obviously. To them, it is a religious matter. It has to do with prophecy. And I ain't touching that with a 10-foot pole. So no, they are not anti-Semitic. Your next sentence is Israel has bombed schools, hospitals, houses, cut off electricity, food, water, and even bombed refugee camps. This is all factual. If you want to use my comments section to broadcast news updates, be my guest. If you stick to facts, I have no problem with that. I mean, so long as you keep it balanced, like explain why. Why did Hamas attack this area? Why did Israel attack the refugee camps? Explain that the hospitals have been turned into military bunkers by Hamas. And they're basically keeping these sick children as hostages. Explain that. Keep it balanced. Keep it factual. And I don't care. Anyway, you conclude with, how ironic that yesterday's oppressed are today's oppressor, and even worse. Hashtag Free Palestine. Who were the oppressed of yesterday? Was it the state of Israel? Dear me, no one told the United States. Who was oppressed? Who are you blaming? And who oppressed them? To where you think they are now even worse than the oppressors of the past. Shall I answer the obvious? It was Jews oppressed by the Nazis. You're not saying the state of Israel are the oppressed of today. No. You're saying Jews. Jews are worse than Nazis. Fuck you. You anti-Semitic swine. Fuck you. Actually, let me say it as a Jew. May the Lord bless you with the best of the 10 plagues. May you make a fortune so you can afford your medical bills. May you lie in the ground and bake like a bagel. May your enemies sprain their ankles dancing on your grave. May you accidentally expose your anti-Semitism to a writer with a Jewish husband so that she may give you your almost 2 hours of fame as she eviscerates you in front of everyone. God willing. Amisa Mashi Aftir.